What does it take to truly retire happy? Author Christine Benz shares her lessons learned from 20 retirement thought leaders. Here we go. Welcome to the Forget About Money podcast, where we encourage you to take action today so that you can focus on what matters most to you. Today, Christine Benz shares with us how to retire happily. Christine is the Director of Personal Finance and Retirement Planning for Morningstar and an acclaimed author known for her practical financial advice. In her upcoming book, How to Retire, Lessons from 20 Retirement Thought Leaders, she explores what contributes to a healthy, happy, and wealthy retirement. Welcome, Christine.
David, it's great to be with you. Thank you so much for having me on.
Christine, you've written a number of financial-based books. What caused you to expand the discussion to no longer focus on just finance, but the more holistic aspect of a person in retirement?
Yeah, it's interesting. I started as part of Morningstar's fund research team and was eventually head of our U.S. team of analysts covering mutual funds. And now the team, of course, covers exchange-traded funds. But along the way, I began to think, well, gosh, there's a lot of stuff that even though we're doing great work on the fund reports, I felt like there's a lot of decisions that people make that we're not really addressing with this work. So I went through the CFP program at that time and then began to focus more broadly on financial planning matters. And as I did that work, I began to get just so much feedback from people who were about to retire, in retirement. I noticed how engaged they were because they're sort of at, point of purchase in their lives where they've really got to make some decisions. When you're in the accumulation years, it's kind of easy to drift along. You maybe defaulted into some sort of retirement savings option. But once you are ready to retire or in retirement, you've got to make some decisions. So I began to focus my work more heavily on financial planning and other decisions for people at that life stage. And that was really the genesis for the book, harnessing some of the great contacts that I've made along the way and bringing insights into the book about retirement decumulation, but also lifestyle considerations in retirement.
Your new book features lessons from 20 retirement thought leaders, a very impressive list. Which lesson do you believe is the most crucial for retirees to retire happily?
Probably the lesson with, and it's hard to pick because I love all the chapters, but the chapter that I was most excited about, I think, was the conversation with Laura Carstensen. She's a Stanford researcher. She heads up the Stanford Center on Longevity. Mm-hmm. And her lesson is about relationships and the importance of relationships throughout our life cycles. They are integral to our sense of happiness, our sense of well-being. And one really fascinating takeaway from her research is just that our social networks do tend to winnow down a little bit as we age, but that's okay. That we're a lot of times getting more selective about the people we spend time with. And of course, we might have sad things that contribute to the winnowing of that social network. We might have people move away or get sick and die. But a lot of it is that we're self-selecting into the relationships that we value the most. I know we've all probably had experiences where you meet up with some friends or a friend and you come away from that relationship, come away from that engagement kind of walking on air. Just you feel like you've been so listened to and you've given of yourself. That's what she's talking about. When she talks about these social networks getting smaller, we're selecting into relationships like that. So it's a really positive, uplifting message. And she has other lessons on happiness as well. But I think that, you can kind of bring them together. So she talks about the value of nurturing your health as well as getting outside if you possibly can, and making sure that you're staying up to date on your social contacts. And you can bring those things together. So I think I said, so you could plan to take a walk outside with a friend, and you're ticking a lot of boxes that contribute to happiness. If you're sort of thinking about things like that.
And relationships, as you just mentioned, is definitely vital for anyone to be happy at any point in their life, especially in retirement. You're right. Whenever we may have already left a job or moved, our kids maybe have already moved away, and we're lacking those connections. So yeah, I appreciate you mentioning that, because that's important, not just later in your life, but throughout your entire life. And if we could focus on that, at least as one of the many things we should be focusing on as we go from even early adulthood through adulthood and into retirement age, I think maybe it won't be such a shock whenever we have enough money, we stop working, our kids are gone, and then instead of being like wondering what to do now, we will have already been aware of it and developed some of those habits that will help us live a happier life in retirement.
Right. And a few different people in the book do mention that sometimes men struggle with this, that men might have more of their identities aligned with their work and more of their social networks than is the case with women, that women tend to have maybe more friendships in their community, friends, kids, parents, things like that. Men may have fewer relationships like that. So it's really important for men to kind of think about, well, how will I replace those work friendships when I'm retired? Or it's not necessarily men, but anyone who does have their primary relationships or a lot of their relationships and social interaction coming through work should be proactive about, well, where will I meet people? Where will I form future social engagements? And it does involve kind of putting yourself out there, which gets harder as we age, asking someone to do something. It's not necessarily comfortable, but it's valuable to kind of think about, okay, what are my activities and where will I be able to find those relationships if I'm leaving some important relationships that I had through my work?
Yeah, so relationships is extremely important, and you address that in your book. It does also include some financial aspects. Wade Pfau, who is a well-known professor of retirement income, he discusses knowing your retirement income style. How can identifying this style help retirees retire happy and secure?
I have been so influenced by Wade's work, and specifically his retirement planning guidebook, where he talks about figuring out your retirement income style. And the point there is that it's not one size fits all, that some people may be perfectly comfortable using a total return approach, maintaining a stock bond portfolio that maybe includes a little bit of cash, and then just systematically withdrawing from that portfolio. Other people might be more comfortable kind of locking it down in advance of retirement. And so you might want to purchase some sort of an annuity, for example. I tend to like the very basic annuity types, that don't have high commissions and don't have a lot of bells and whistles, but just give you a guaranteed stream of income throughout your life. So I would urge people to run through Wade's questionnaire on identifying your retirement income style. For people who are familiar with the Morningstar style box that looks at various components of the stock and bond market and kind of puts them on a 9-box grid, Wade's retirement income style questionnaire is kind of similar, where they actually have a 4-box grid that helps you determine where you land. And that can help you come up with what the right complexion is for your retirement income stream. And it's really personal. And I think in part, it depends on how you earned your income while you were working. So, for example, if someone's been a teacher throughout their life and they've had, fairly stable income and maybe, inflation adjustments each year to help keep them whole with their cost of living, someone like that might naturally gravitate to an income source in retirement that simulates what they had while they were working. On the other hand, a commission salesperson, for example, would be much more comfortable with a lumpier stream of income, or maybe not. Maybe they'd say, I've had it with that lumpy stream of income that I had with my commissions. Now I really want to lock it down and have sort of a paycheck equivalent in retirement. So the bottom line is to get to know yourself, to get to know your disposition. If you're married, if you have a partner, go through this with your partner to make sure that you're at least semi synced up on this stuff, because you might have different dispositions and different retirement income styles.
You've got a lot of big names in this book. I'll ask you offline how you got those names. I know you're well known as well. And this is, you've been in this industry for a while, so you've got some great context. Another very well-known name is Ramit Sethi. And he's got the Netflix show. He's got a pretty thriving YouTube channel. His most recent video I just saw where he's like, things I hate about the FIRE movement. I'm not sure if you've seen that or not. I'm not sure about it, but he's definitely well-known, and he's bringing some good messages out there. He speaks in your book, and he highlights spending to optimize happiness. What are some practical ways a retiree can align their spending with their goal to retire happy?
Yeah, I love Ramit's work on spending. I feel like it's such an under-discussed aspect of financial wellness. And his main point is that your spending shouldn't look like everyone else's. And I think naturally we all, kind of think about the neighborhood that we live in and what people around us are doing and use that to help guide our spending. But his point is really that you should take a step back. If having a luxury car isn't a priority for you, don't have a luxury car. Spend elsewhere. Maybe a priority for you is really seeing the world. So his point is you're doing it right if your spending looks different from other people's, and that you get funny looks sometimes. If people say, gosh, and I personally am not a car person. My husband likes cars. But for years, I had my 2012 Honda Accord. I actually replaced it recently and got a car with a backup camera, which I wanted. But for the most part, it's not something I care about. And I did think that maybe my neighbors and friends thought, well, gosh, how good could she be at her job of talking about investment stuff if she's driving a 2012 Honda Accord? So you have to be prepared to feel out of sync with other people around you. But I think that's part of the importance of doing this, to make sure that your spending is actually aligned with your personal priorities. Ramit also believes in visioning, kind of looking down the line and thinking about, well, what do I want to do if I have some time in retirement? What are the things that I want to do? What's sort of my idea of a really magical thing to do with my time? And of course, you'd want to think about whatever budget you have, but just really start dreaming about it. Think about those plans, who you'd want to see doing those plans with you, and spending some time kind of creating maybe a 2-year plan, a 5-year plan, a 10-year plan, and setting some goals for your spending.
Yeah, I really like the idea of just being very intentional why you're doing it, aligning with your values. First off, you have to identify what your values are, at least for that point in your life, because they will change over time somewhat. But the point is to be very intentional and if you know what your values are, then you can align your resources, which is your time, effort, or energy, and money. And you said you might feel out of sync with others, but I think if you really do that intentionally, you feel way more in sync with yourself. And that's much more important than caring what other people think or the perception of what other people have of you.
Absolutely. One thing I've become increasingly conscious of in interacting with older adults, and it may have to do with our specific demographic, the Morningstar.com readers and viewers. They tend to be fairly affluent group. They're investors. They're engaged in investing. But one problem that I think has been under-discussed in the realm of retirement planning is people actually giving themselves permission to spend what they could spend. I think that it's very hard to flip that switch from being a saver and kind of, you may have had that as your identity while you were, or at least one of your identities while you were in accumulation mode, that I'm a person who defers gratification. I am not necessarily a spender. Well, at some point you have to get comfortable with spending from your portfolio. And I think that is something that we probably haven't discussed enough in the context of retirement decumulation. Like, how do you give yourself permission to actually spend what you could spend?
Yeah. And I'm not sure if you know them, but from some friends of mine who are on Ramit's podcast, and you're probably aware of this because I think it made a big splash. Carl and Mindy Jensen
I don't know them. No.
So he's got a pretty reputable blog, and she's the co-host of Bigger Pockets podcast and Bigger Pockets Money podcast. And they live in Colorado. They've accumulated more than a net worth of greater than 4 million. So Ramit had them on, and they were talking about how they have trouble spending the money or getting out of their old habits. And I know them personally, good friends, great people. And Ramit was pretty hard on them. But in my conversations with them afterwards, they said a lot had come to light, and the amount of support and they've got from people in the financial independence community and the financial community at large. And so I do like that Ramit is having those kinds of conversations and bringing, value to not only just people who are trying to accumulate the wealth, but also make adjustments to behaviors of those who have basically identified their whole lifestyle through a series of very, very narrow habits of saving and being frugal and watching every penny that you spend. But yeah, so that was a pretty popular podcast.
I did hear about that. Now that you mention it, I didn't know the specific names involved, but I did see Ramit commenting on that particular discussion. And I do think that sometimes when I talk about this permission to spend thing, retirees are thinking that I'm saying that, oh, you need to go out to dinner every night or buy a luxury car that you don't want. I'm not. I don't think that's what any of us are saying. In fact, maybe it's giving the funds away, and that counts as spending too, but it's a different form of spending, helping your loved ones earlier than would have been the case if you left the money to them after you pass away. I think there's a lot that's suboptimal about kids inheriting assets when they're in their 50s or 60s because the die is kind of set on their lives at that life stage. That, yes, it might make a big difference for someone who's dramatically underfunded for retirement, but not necessarily. And the example I often give is that when my husband and I were buying our first house in 1994, we were kind of looking around. And I remember my dad said, we had looked at a house we liked that was a little out of our price range. Not a lot, just a little. And my dad said, what if we helped with that? And they gave us some money. It wasn't a huge sum of money that helped us get into a better house. And we were able to live in it for, 15 years before we moved to a different house. But we loved the house. We loved the community. And when my parents passed away, we ended up inheriting more money from my mom and dad. But it was that initial gift, which was much smaller than the funds that we inherited at their deaths, but it was a much more impactful gift. And that counted as retirement savings for them or retirement spending, that gift that they gave to us in 1994. But I think that they would have said that it was very well worth it. And it was certainly a real difference maker for us. We never needed an addition. We never asked or needed to ask them for money again. But it was that initial gift that made such a difference. And I want people to think about that, smaller gifts earlier.
Yeah. And that is for someone I'm financially independent, and I'm not like a trillionaire or anything, but it is something when you get to, I'm 46 years old and I've got children, and one is just entering adulthood, the other one's 10. But it is something I think about. Well, how do you transfer your wealth because if it doesn't happen now, it's going to happen when you die. And then you have no control of how necessarily, like, no influence on how they receive the money, how they use it. You can't guide them. You're no longer there. But so it is something I think about a lot as far as at what point in my life do I start transitioning my own wealth? to my kids. And then of course there's tax implications. There's all those things, but the highest motivator would be making sure that I have a role in helping them with that transition.
Yeah, I think it's a huge topic of conversation among parents about how to help kids, how to not create a dependency, because that's an issue too. I have a lot of financial planner friends, and I was out with a couple of them one night, and we started talking about, adult children, especially of wealthier parents, in some cases do have an unhealthy financial dependency on their parents. And with these financial planner friends, it was like, I felt like I was leading a support group because this was such a big problem for them, actually helping parents not overgive to their children, because I think parents can err too much in that direction too. And anecdotally, in talking to some adult parents who have done that and have created kind of an unhealthy financial dependency, I think there's a lot of kind of shame about that, about the sense that, my child hasn't thrived and they still are highly dependent on me, even at an age where they should be fully launched. So there, I think, can be kind of a negative side to overgiving. So it's a fine line. It's obviously very individual, family specific, and dependent on the family's own finances. But it's a topic that I think deserves more discussion probably than it's gotten.
No, I agree. When I was researching this new book that you're releasing in just a few months, September, I believe it's officially released on Amazon.
That's right. Amazon, all the usual places, but yes, Amazon.
I know a lot of people are looking forward to that. So I saw a familiar name when I was reading the description, and that name is a good friend of mine, Jordan Grummett, also known as Doc G in other circles. But he retired a few years ago. He was a hospice doctor. And I know he wrote a book talking about like what really matters in life. And so I was really excited when I saw his name listed in the description. I'm like, oh, that's great. More people get to listen to this message. He talked about living without regrets in your book. What advice do you have for ensuring that retirees live happily and without regrets? It's kind of hard to say that nobody has regrets, but what can we do?
Yeah, I love that chapter with Jordan. He's one of my favorite people in this whole world. In fact, I remember when I read Jordan's book, and I was prepping to have him on our podcast, I remember thinking, I get to do this for a job, because this is what's more important than thinking about all of the things that Jordan talks about. A key message in Jordan's chapter, and Jordan is a hospice doctor, where he still works with patients who are dying, who have very little time left on the earth. And a key message from Jordan's interaction with people at that life stage is that they regret things that they didn't try, that they wanted to try but didn't try. So I think that is a key takeaway for me from Jordan's conversation that's in the book, is just try. If you have things, whether it's, some big picture thing, like you want to write a book, or you want to start a foundation, or you have some hobby that you've let lie dormant, something that you really loved that you did when you were younger, just get back in there and try. Because he gives a really moving example of a guy who was dying of leukemia, and I think it was leukemia, who came to the end of his life and loved to regale everyone with how he had climbed. He had not made it to the top of Everest, but he had attempted to climb Mount Everest. And it was just one of the most important things that he had done in his life. He hadn't actually, summited Everest, but he had tried to do it. And that achievement stuck with him and stood out as one of the most memorable things that he had done. So we all have our own list of things that we want to do, or just activities that we love. And that's something that Jordan talks about too, that, it's so important to have purpose. And he distinguishes what he calls big P purpose. So things like starting a foundation or writing a book, from things that he calls small P purpose. And he got me really inspired, talking about some of the small P purpose things that we can do. So it might be being just the best partner that you could be to your spouse, or it might be getting back into some hobby that you loved, or road tripping with your spouse to the national parks or whatever. But just spend some time thinking about, what do I want to achieve in these remaining years of my life. Michael Finca talked about how, we might think about our lives as a series of dots on a page, that if we're retiring at 65, we've got 65 dots already down. We might have 25 more dots. And so think about those precious dots and make sure that you are living your life in an intentional way where you're actually achieving the small P purpose things as well as the big P purpose things.
Money is a part of this conversation. So it's a balance between your financial situation and your, I don't want to say existential, but your purpose and how you spend your energy in the world. How do you suggest retirees implement your lessons from your book to retire happily?
I think a key one is flexibility. I loved the chapter with Jamie Hopkins where he talks about flexibility / adaptability. I think that's such an important component of all this, where we might think about our retirement life cycle as a series of stages. And sometimes this has been kind of shorthanded as like go, slow go, no go. But you might think about your retirement life and your spending as a series of stages. And things might change along the way, just in terms of your activities, how much you're spending, how much you're withdrawing from the portfolio. When we look at the data on how retirees actually spend, we do see that retirement spending is not a straight line, that people tend to spend less as they age. They don't give themselves an inflation adjustment every year. They spend less than the inflation rate, or their spending increases at a rate less than the inflation rate. So planning to adapt as you go, I think, is one of the best things you can do. One thing I have come away with my interactions with older adults is just that I want to be flexible. Like I'll eat anything you put in front of me. I'll hear out any reasonable viewpoint, that I just want to stay flexible. That's one key thing that I want to take into retirement. Not just with respect to my finances, though that's important, but with all aspects of life, staying flexible, not being stubborn and set in my ways. If I have loved ones who are telling me that I should consider doing something, I'm not going to just dig in my heels and look the other way and ignore everyone. So that's one thing that I came away from the book with, is the importance of staying flexible, staying adaptable with finances and with the rest of life.
Have you received any feedback from the early readers or the ahead copies that you sent out that made you rethink any part of the book in terms of achieving a happy retirement?
Not really. I've gotten such good feedback. So I did send the book out for endorsements and kind of created a dream team of endorsers to take a look at the book. People like Michael Kitces and Manisha Kaur. And the feedback was just so lovely. People seem to really dig the book. And so I'm happy with the reception. As I was working on it, I literally had a couple of nights where I was so excited that I couldn't sleep. I was like, I can't wait for people to see this. And so that's been the reception. I mean, I would say a few people have said that they wish they were in it, and it was hard to make the cuts, because I'm lucky to have a good kind of Rolodex of people, especially from working on my podcast. And certainly there were many great retirement thinkers who aren't in the book. And another thing that I heard, I guess a piece of feedback just on the concept of the book leverages retirement experts, but it seems like a great follow-up book would be interviews with actual retirees, non-professional not professional investors, about what they did right in retirement, because I think that there's a wealth of knowledge to be gained from just talking to regular people. about what they're doing, how they're doing, invariably someone has an example of kind of a super ager, someone who is really doing retirement right. One person I know of is Paul Merriman, who is a retirement educator now. He's a retired financial advisor, but you sometimes hear about, well, your human capital ebbs away as you age. And Paul Merriman is the opposite example of that. He's in his 80s and continuing to go strong, just making a contribution to make the world a better place. So those kinds of examples, I think, could be another great book.
I think Paul is the reason you and I are actually talking right now.
Oh, is that right?
I think so. Yeah.
Okay.
I'm pretty sure it's him.
I love Paul. He's one of the great individuals I've gotten to know in this on this journey.
He really is. I remember I was just talking to him on a video chat once, and my son walked in, and Paul just started singing some song to him, and he was much younger. He was like 6 or 7, or maybe 8 years old, maybe 7. I don't know. But it was very nice of Paul to be that. Just son doesn't know who he is. He's just on the screen. But it was nice that they had that little interaction.
He's one of the kindest, best people. He really is.
I saw him as recently as just a few months ago. He was down in Palm Springs, and I drove up, and we had a quick visit. It was nice to see him.
Wonderful.
Do you see any trends that, whether it's from within the financial community or other experts that you've talked to, or things that you're seeing online, are there trends that we should be aware of so that we can maybe say, oh, that's interesting, and then go do some additional research and allow it to help us live happier lives in retirement?
Yeah, one is this idea of phased retirement. It's something that I've been working on, writing about. I jokingly call it me search, sort of like just trying to figure this out myself. And I think that we're going to see more phased retirement, but I think sometimes people think too narrowly about it. I will say I thought too narrowly about it. I thought, okay, maybe you go from 40 hours a week to 30 to 15 or what. And yes, that indeed might be a component of it, because 40 hours a week is a big chunk of time to give to an employer. But I like the idea of people thinking more expansively about kind of the substance of their work. So if you can get yourself into a position where you're doing more of the work that you love, you're casting off parts of your job that you don't love as much. And admittedly, that's kind of a luxury good where you've got to be sitting in a good position with your employer to be able to pick and choose what you do. And I will say that, some of the things that you want to cast off are probably things that you've gotten good at over the years. The thing that you want to step away from, maybe the thing that your employer really wants you to keep doing. So it's not necessarily simple, but I think that more older adults should be looking at that kind of phased retirement, because as Laura Carstensen says in the book, the way we work is what's not good for us, but work is good for us, like doing something. And it doesn't have to be paid work, but doing something that gets you up in the morning, that gets you into contact with other people, that might confer a sense of purpose. It's super valuable to us as human beings. And there might also be financial side benefits. So I think we'll see more kind of phased retirement. I'd like to see people think expansively about it. I also would like people to recognize that they are perhaps a little less in control of their retirement dates than they might like to think they are. Because when you look at the data on when people said they expected to retire and when they actually retired, you see a disconnect there. So generally people think that they'll be able to work longer than they're able to work. And there are a lot of things that can get in the way of someone being able to continue working. But that's an important dimension of this. And we did our podcast with Anita Mukherjee at University of Wisconsin a year or so ago, where she talked about the spoils of working longer are disproportionately falling to healthier, wealthier people. That this is not an equal opportunity thing. That's the way our culture is, that unfortunately not everyone is able to continue working who might want to. So that's kind of a separate dimension, but I think that there's definitely a socioeconomic dimension to all of this.
I know you talked about being more flexible in your own life, but we talked about a lot of different ideas and many ideas that we didn't talk about. How are you using all of this in your own life? Because I know you're an author. You've written a number of books. You're on not only your own podcast, but you're on many other people's podcasts as guests. You have a real job with Morningstar. And I have no idea what else you're into, but that doesn't sound like retirement to me. So how are you, or are you even trying to transition into what a normal person would consider a retirement?
Yeah, it's interesting. It's a work in progress. And I'm also the president of the John C. Bogle Center for Financial Literacy. So that's something that is a volunteer activity that I'm into. So it's a balancing act. I feel lucky because I have realized, and I have to credit Scott Burns, who's a retirement columnist. He's in his 80s now. He had been a retirement columnist for the Dallas Morning News for many years. And I think maybe USA Today or another big outlet. But he said, as he was kind of moving along toward retirement, he realized, he made the point to me, maybe in our podcast, maybe offline to me, I realized that my highest best use in this world probably wasn't stocking shelves in the food pantry, that it's probably doing some version of the work that I did throughout my working career, where he felt like his work was inherently altruistic, educational. And I kind of feel the same, that the work that I get to do does feel like community service to me in a lot of ways, where at least that's what I'm trying to do, that I'm trying to focus on things that are helpful. And that's, it's such a luxury to get to wake up in the morning and say, what are the retirement financial planning topics that are giving people trouble right now? How can I help them think this through by writing something, by researching, by doing a podcast on this topic? So, that's what I've decided, at least for now. I want to focus on those things that do feel educational / altruistic. There are a few things that I'd like to do less of. So I'm not a big fan of having meetings. I am doing a little less work travel than I once did so that I can enjoy my personal travel more. So I'm trying to make some changes around the margins. I'm now a full-time remote worker, so I'm able to go into the office, and I do love my time in the office, but just kind of on an as needed, as wanted basis, which is really great too. So just kind of trying to be thoughtful and deliberate about how I use my time and my energies is kind of the direction where I'm headed.
Well, Christine, it's great to meet you. So we look forward to your book coming out. Again, it's How to Retire, Lessons from 20 Retirement Thought Leaders. I wish you the best of luck. Thank you very much for chatting with me today. And thank you all for watching and listening.
Thanks, David.